demons, cleanse lepers, preach the gospel. Those are things he delegated to us. That was my job to cast those demons out. And he expected me to know that, to know who I was, who he was, and what our respective roles are. If I had known that, I could be in hell right now. Not a good thing. Anyway, as soon as the demons were gone, the vision returned, and I pulled the canoe or the papyrus boat back up to the head, reached out, touched the eyes, they turned clear, and then instantly the vision was over. I was back in the living room, and Jesus said, "It's time to put you back in your body." And right then, I remembered my list of questions. Oh, I wanted to answer Pastor's list of questions so badly. But unlike the book with Dr. Eby, Jesus didn't offer to answer those questions. And I was just like, I really want to get answers to these questions. It's very important to me. But on the other hand, Jesus had just saved me from hell, eternity in hell. He just showed me how to heal my body. And he was just about to resurrect me. And I did not want to say anything that would jeopardize that. Because like I said, he's God. And we just do not do anything to offend him. You can't, the consequences are unspeakable. And I just resigned myself, okay, I'm going to go back and forget about the questions, and I'll do my best, once I get back to figure this out myself. But, I forgot something very important. What's that?
What did you forget?
Well, he knows our every thought. Jesus knew what I was thinking. I wasn't saying anything, but he knew exactly what I was thinking. And what he said to me? He said, "Carl, would you like the answers to my list of questions?"
He flipped it on you.
Oh, wow. I didn't know what to do with that. Momentarily, I thought about, I have no idea what his list of questions is. Certainly going to be different from my list of questions. And I finally concluded whatever his list is, it's going to be better than mine. So yes, I want the answers to your list of questions. And then Jesus says to me, "Carl, your mind is too small to understand my list of questions, because my list of questions is all questions. Are you willing to become one with me and share my mind?" Well, at that point, I had done a lot of research into near-death experiences. And in none of those stories did anyone ever become one with God and share his mind. I had no precedent for that. There was nothing in the scriptures, anything like that. And I had done, a comparative study of religions, and there are some religions out there that teach if you become one with God, you cease to exist because you are absorbed into him, and your personality is just lost in his infiniteness. And it's like, he's got a really powerful person I'm dealing with here. I would just be overwhelmed and just disappear in there, and I might cease to be me. And I like me. I wasn't interested in, just being absorbed and disappearing into God. But then, I realized he loved me. He had a plan for me. He wasn't going to do anything bad. So this has got to be a good thing. But I had no idea what I was getting into, and I said, yes. And the moment I agreed to that, I just felt myself sucked into Jesus Christ himself, and we were one. And I knew what he knew, and he knew what I knew, but my personality was still intact with all my memories. And what was remarkable about that is I thought, this is really normal and natural. I feel like I've been here before and done this before, but I don't remember this at all. And it was so perfect, so right. And I also detected that not only was I in Jesus, but I was in the Father too. And so I knew what the Father was doing and thinking. And what was remarkable is that even though they're one, they have distinct personalities. They're very different in their personalities, but they are identical in their character. And that was a profound revelation for me, because How can someone be one with another entity and still retain their individuality? But that's the way it works. And I got a glimpse of everything that God was doing. It was amazing. The things that were going on in heaven. And I got to see the whole universe at a glance. And I realized there are many worlds out there, and there are worlds out there that have people on them, human beings like us. But they're perfect worlds because Satan is not there. And I got to see the celestial city, and it was vast, enormous, like almost infinite. And yet I could comprehend that at a glance without any difficulty. And the activities going on there are amazing. The things that are, God is very dynamic. We think of God as being some static, divine being that sits on a throne and surrounded by angels and kind of just sits there like he's a painting portrait. But no, he is involved in so many different things, and they're so powerful, so energetic, so dynamic, so diverse. There's no end to them. And that was just a glimpse I got. And then this wall like came around the mind that I shared with God and Christ, and it narrowed everything down to one subject, and that was human history. So Jesus explained to me that we were going to take a look at human history from his perspective. He showed me human history in two different ways. The first way was we looked at an individual, and we would start out looking at their life and see how the decisions they make affected the course of their life. And I'm an engineer, so I understand something about statistics and probability. And what was interesting to me is that in calculus, we say a equation is bounded when it has limits to it. If you do an integral, it'll have a lower and upper limit, and you'll do the calculation between the limits. And all of our choices are all carefully scripted by God to be within certain boundaries. We cannot go this far evil, and we cannot only go this far good. We can only be this poor or this rich. But there is an infinite number of choices in between. So when a person makes a choice, they will go one way or the other, and they can go back and forth. And they got free will, but there is one path that God has chosen for them. But it's up to them if they take that or not. And so we looked at that, and it's an infinite number of permutations. So we have an infinite number of choices, infinite number of permutations for one life. And then we looked at how two lives interacted. And we saw that the choices of one affect the other. And so our choices not only affect our life, but they can also affect others. But God will now allow one person's choices to basically force another person into either heaven or hell. They still always have that free will, that choice there. But our choices do affect others, and quite profoundly. And so you had an infinite number of permutations in one life, an infinite number of permutations in another life. You multiply that, that's an infinity times an infinity. And we looked at this as like that. God's mind can comprehend an infinite number of permutations effortlessly, like we look at ordinal numbers, 1, 2, 3. And so then we looked at how a family would interact, and then how a community would interact, and then how a region would act or interact, and then a state, and then a country, and then a whole empire. And we looked at the whole of human history from the creation of Earth and Adam and Eve to the end of time. And the whole exercise was subjectively about 5 minutes for me. And what I saw in there was very profound, in that there is order and patterns that we can't see from our perspective down here. But everything from God's perspective follows a predetermined plan. It's got purpose. It's got meaning. It's got rich in symbolism. And there's just amazing opportunities in this life that we just have no idea what we're missing. And at the end of that, I was like, I had just taken the ultimate roller coaster ride. I was just thrilled. I was amazed. And there was like a pause in what we were communication, like Jesus was waiting for me to have some kind of reaction, but whatever it was, he didn't get it from me. And he seemed to almost sigh, and he said, Carl, let's try this from another perspective. And so we went through the whole exercise, and this time we started with a different person, different, kind of emphasis on history, and there was all this other things, and I saw amazing things. The whole of human history. I knew the details of every life, not only that had been lived and would be lived, but could have been lived, because there are a lot of people who could have and should have been born or were killed early in their lives and didn't get to realize it. But I saw the whole thing, every possible thing, and it was beautiful. I thought, wow, God has done incredible work just planning out our lives beforehand. It talks, Sid Roth talks, Kevin Zadai especially talks about the books that are written about us in heaven. They're real, and they are so amazingly detailed, and they're really infinite in the content too. It's not, just a book you take off the shelf. So we did that the second time, and again there was this pause, and it was like Jesus was waiting for something, and I was again excited and thrilled, and was just amazed at this experience. And I was thinking, why me? How come I'm experiencing all this amazing stuff? And then Jesus said, Carl, I think we need to do this a third time. There was something new in his tone of voice. It was like, there's something you need to get, and you're not getting it. And I knew right away that I needed to pay attention very closely at this third one, because this was going to be the last opportunity. And if I didn't get it this time, I wasn't going to get it at all. And this was historic. I know enough about history to realize I need to do this right, and because I've got to bring something profound back, but I had no idea what it was. So this time when we went through the exercise, I paid very, very close attention. And that's where this second vision of how he showed me human history came in, because this is all happening simultaneously. Now, I can't do justice to this because at that point my mind was in infinite mode, and there's so many details I can't even recall now. But while this is going on, I'm also seeing at the same time human history shown in graphical form, where each person's life is represented by a thread. Excuse me, my lungs still have some damage on them from the accident. So the person's life starts as a thread, and during the course of their life, it has several different colors to it. And it starts out white, and if they're living a good, righteous life, it stays white. But if they start to sin, it darkens. So a relatively small sin, it turns like a beige color. A more serious sin, it'll turn tan, and then brown, and then finally, when someone is just all out evil, it's black. And when the person dies, it changes color on the entire length to one of two colors. If they go to heaven, it turns gold. If they go to hell, it turns red. And once these threads, they would come to bundles. The smallest bundle would be like a family or close friends. And then, again, the bundles would be in communities, and as I said before, larger or geographical locations and states and nations and empires. And what was remarkable about this is the bundles would come together in these nodes. And so the nodes are several years wide, sometimes decades, but when the bundles come together, I noticed something about human history, and that when the nodes are present, it's very malleable. That a few individuals who understand the principles of divine history can make incredible impact that can just change the course of history, like diverting a river and at these nodes. And I could see where I was in the timeline. This is 1995, and I saw that the next major node was in 1998. And later on, after 1998, I realized that was when a lot of these big tech giants got their beginnings. And so they have become somebody knew what they were doing back then, and they became extremely powerful influencers in our society because of that. But it wasn't so good. The other thing I noticed was that at the end of time, the two bundles divided. The gold went up, to heaven, and the red went down to hell. And I noticed the one going up to heaven was much smaller in diameter than the one going to hell. And I've worked as a machinist. And as a machinist, I've learned to measure things very accurately visually. I can look at something and tell, at least at that point, it's been decades since then, so it's not quite as accurate as it was. But at that point, I could look at something and measure it visually to within 1 part in 1,000. And so I realized that 2.5%, plus or minus 0.1% of the general population went to heaven. The other remainder, 97.5%, went to hell. And since then, I've run into other people with near-death experiences, like Howard Pittman, exactly the same numbers. Kevin Zadai did the same numbers. Jeremy Nelson did the same numbers. So I'm pretty confident about that number. And when I realized that, Jesus interrupted the exercise to say, and I am very disappointed in my church. I gave the church everything they needed to win the entire world to salvation from any generation since the apostles, and they have failed. See, the 2.5%, that is the remnant that God keeps for himself. So that's a given. Okay? So that means that the church is right now batting 0.
Wow.
Jesus was very, very angry about that, actually. So, anyway, in the third exercise, I was paying very close attention to the colors of these threads. And when it was white, I noticed that when people made a decision, they used a certain criteria. Selfless love. And when they sinned, they were being selfish or cowardly, or they were being lazy. Those were the 3 biggies that were leading people to make sinful decisions. Selfishness, laziness, cowardice, and ignorance played a large factor in that too. And right then I realized that the central theme of this whole creation, the whole of human history, was to teach one central lesson, and that is selfless love. And I realized there's only one question that really matters, and that is, what does this have to do with selfless love? If you make a decision based on selfless love, you're making the right decision. If you make it on any other criteria, you're making a wrong decision. And I got that. Jesus did not even continue the exercise. He stopped it right there. He said, Carl, that's the point I wanted you to get. It's time for you to go back. And right then, we started to separate. And as we separated, I could feel my mind shrinking back to its normal parameters, which is not ideal for me, because I could feel this massive amount of information just flowing out of me like a torrent. And I was thinking, this is good stuff. I want to keep this information. I need to take this back with me. And I was literally reaching up, trying to push this stuff back into me. And Jesus was like, well, you don't need that. You got what you needed. Time to go back. And in short order, I was back in my living room. Jesus was standing me by the body. And he didn't say anything more to me, but I was like, well, wait a minute. How do I raise my children right? And how do I get it right with you? And I had some other questions, and I would just suck right back into my body. And next thing I know, I'm in my body. It's dark. I'm in pain again. Thirsty. I'm hungry. I'm tired. And it's like, I'm alive, but it hurts. And I got up in the dark. I felt my way to the bathroom, and I clicked on the light. And at first, I couldn't see because I still had pus in my eyes, but I washed the pus out of it, and I could see clearly, and the pus didn't come back. And there was no pain in my throat. I'm hungry. I want something to eat. My favorite meal is breakfast. Here it is. I go straight from the bathroom to the kitchen, and the first thing I do when I get to the kitchen is I turn on the light and I look up at the clock, because I knew it was midnight when I died. And at the clock, it said 6 minutes after midnight, and I didn't spend much time in the bathroom, so I figured about a minute. So this whole experience was about 5 minutes or less.
Wow.
So it's taken me over an hour and a quarter to tell you the story. And the whole, in temporal times, it was minutes. And I didn't tell you a fraction of what entirely transpired there. So I go to the kitchen, turn on the lights, I start cooking breakfast. I put a big breakfast, bacon, eggs, toast, juice, milk, cereal, and I'm eating there. And I'm in the middle of eating my breakfast at, just past midnight. And Yanina pokes her head around the door and she looks at me and she said, "Carl, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm eating breakfast." And she said, "Why are you eating breakfast at this time?" And I said, "Oh, it's amazing. I mean, I died and then God healed me and I'm alive again and I can eat and drink and it doesn't hurt." And then she was like, "Well, stop making so much noise. I'm trying to sleep." And then she turned around and went back to bed. Oh. And that's kind of how it's been for many years, trying to tell this story, because I found that people who haven't had a near-death experience have a very difficult time relating to this. But people that do, they do relate. And what's interesting is, for about 18 months after that, there was 2 profound changes in my life. And I'll tell you about that if you've got, but I'm going to pause here to see if you've got any questions.
Oh, I have a ton of questions, but I'll ask them at the end.
Okay. So 2 things that really changed right after that was, one, the Lord could heal people of pretty much anything instantly and permanently just by my laying on hands. So that was one thing that was amazing. The problem was that the church I was going to at the time, I'm not going to name names, they're cessationists. They did not believe that you could still do miracles after the death of the last apostles. And so they absolutely forbid me to minister healing in the church, even though I could do it. It was like, that is not done. The pastor said to me, "Carl, you cannot heal by laying on hands." And this is a man who was pastoring the church who preached from the Bible where it said you could and should, which is tragic because one of the very elders in the church that came up with a pastor and surrounded me and forbidden me to minister healing in the church died of a heart attack shortly after that. I hope he was ready for eternity. But the other thing that was really unique about this was that whenever I got close to somebody who had had some kind of supernatural experience, I sensed it. Which is really cool, because I would come into proximity of somebody and I would know they had a near-death experience. And I would say, "Tell me your story." And at first they were hesitant because this was the mid-90s and near-death experiences were actually treated very negatively back then. And so if you tried to tell your story, you'd get stomped on pretty hard, pretty quick, especially by the church leadership. At least where I was. And so people got very cautious about who they would tell their stories to. But I would say, "I've had one too. You can tell me. I will listen." And then they would tell me their stories, and I got some of the best stories. People who went to heaven, people who went to hell. There was one lady, a nurse. She went to hell first, and then she had another one and went to heaven. And then I'm an engineer, so I like math. And so I was doing a random sampling of the population, and what I learned out was about 2% of the general population have had some kind of supernatural experience, at least at that time. That was true. And that told me there's millions of people out there with something to tell. And at that time, there really wasn't an audience for it. But now there's all kinds of interest in it, which is really good in some cases, but really bad because there's people coming out with, fake stories. And the devil is also creating false near-death experiences too, which is sad. But anyway, I still have the gift before. It doesn't work nearly as well as it used to, but I use it to minister healing and deliverance, and also to discern things in the spirit and give people prophetic words. So to this day, 30 years later, still going.
Wow. You know, Carl, it's interesting. If you think about ignorance, it's not bliss, right?
No, it's actually ignorance is a sin. We're commanded to know about the Lord and understand Scripture. So ignorance was wrong.
I had a very similar experience. One time I was choked in the middle of the night, backing up earlier to when you were facing the demons, and I felt powerless. I didn't know what to do. And then deep inside my soul, mind, I don't know where it came from, but I heard my mom's voice, and she said, from very young age, my mom always told us, if you're ever in a supernatural encounter, if you're ever being attacked by the dark side, just say in Jesus' name, go away, something to that effect. And sure enough, I said that, and that thing that was choking me just vanished. That is interesting how much power is in the name of Jesus. But the fact that not all Christians know that and use that, it's scary.
Yeah, I had an encounter like that in 1991. I was traveling and a demon appeared to me in the hotel room on some business trip and also tried to strangle me, and that's how I dealt with that one too.
Interesting. Well, you know, I have this like a list of questions. As you were telling me, I didn't want to interrupt you because there's so many interesting details in your story. I've heard a lot of different near-death experiences, but I've never heard such a detailed one. I think the closest one that I can think of was Howard Storm. I actually met with him. And it's interesting you mentioned that you were able to see other worlds. And that's something that Howard Storm told me as well. When you saw other worlds, what did they look like? Was it similar to these worlds? Was it just like a vision in passing? Were you able to go there?
This was just a glimpse. And so I was aware of other worlds that are habitable with people on them, human beings like us. The huge difference is this is where it's all happening. Hard to understand that in an ordinary galaxy on an N-class planet around a common star, that this is the center of heaven's focus, but it is, because this is where Satan dwells, and this is where evil and good are balanced almost exactly. And so this is where the real battlefield is, and this is where the saints are being prepared for something really profound, that there's not anything like this happening on any other world. Those worlds are basically good, perfect worlds, where sin is not something that's a big deal. I mean, evil exists, but it's just not, it's just so weak, it's irrelevant.
I'm curious, since that experience, what about your family, your children? What do they think about this experience?
They don't really accept my testimony.
Really?
I've given everybody a copy of my book. I've told them my stories. They've even been supernaturally healed. But when Jesus said that if I didn't come back, my kids weren't going to make it, he was not kidding. There's a very serious satanic, assignment against my family to destroy us. And the conventional, methods that the church uses to persuade people and bring them to salvation just do not work. But I still am working on figuring out how that works. So, no.
Yeah, because some of your last questions were, how should I raise my family? So if you went back in time, for example, I have an 8-year-old and 11-year-old, what would you tell somebody like me?
Well, one of my big mistakes is taking for granted that the church has got the plan for the salvation. And the way I addressed that was I made sure that my children were in church every Sunday, prayer meeting on Wednesday nights, and that's home we had Bible studies. I prayed with them every day, and that I even involved them in my efforts at evangelism, which were all good things, but they were not adequate. And too late in the process, I realized that we needed deliverance ministry. And that's something that I neglected. it was about 1998 when I really realized that my children and I, too, needed deliverance ministry. And that was not a thing back then, at least not where we were. And so and at the time I was working in Europe, and I spent the next 2 years buying all the books I could find on it and teaching myself about it. And I finally, paid for two of the best deliverance ministers I could find to come all the way to Europe and minister to my family. And I was very disappointed because they were the best I could find, and they couldn't do it. And so that was a profound disappointment for me. And I spent the next, that was about 2000 when that was going. I spent the next, 15 years getting deeper and deeper into deliverance ministry. And I studied under the very best. I went to the best conferences, studied the best materials. I even wrote a 100-page manual on boiling down everything I had learned to it. And it was only in the last few years that I actually came up with a deliverance system that works against what I was facing. And unfortunately, in that time, the children drifted away from me, and they're now out of communication. But I'm using that now to minister deliverance and healing to others, and praying and believing for a chance to get back and minister to my own children. But I was 20 years behind the curve on realizing how important that kind of ministry is to people who are under exceptionally strong assignments against the devil. I took my children to a prophetic ministry, Rise Christian Fellowship in Austin, Texas, back in the early 20s. And the prophetic words over my children, especially the daughters, were really profound. They're going to, if they accomplish God's purposes, they're going to be nation shakers. And I think that's why the assignment from the enemy is so high level, that the ordinary things of the church really didn't have an effect on them. And now that I finally have the keys and answers to that and can apply them, I'm itching for the opportunity to do that. So,
it's interesting, something you mentioned during your story. You talked about the tech giants. And I'm curious what your take is on artificial intelligence and the future of this world.
That is really evil stuff. Technology is not a bad thing. It's how it's being used. I'm an engineer. I make my living advancing technology, and I'm all 100% for that. But they're turning this artificial intelligence into a substitute for God. People are going to it for information, going to it for advice, asking them how to make investments, how to fight a war. These are all things that are part of God's promises that He will do for us. And we're like saying, God, appreciate the offer, but I've got something better here. And that's a lie the devil's been using from the beginning. And despite the fact that it always turns out bad, people are still falling for it, and they're pouring enormous resources into this artificial intelligence with no idea of the horrible consequences it's going to have.
Do you think it will turn on us eventually?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
It's like, God created us in His image. We turned on Him. We created AI in our image. It will turn on us. And then we'll need a real savior to get us out of that.
Yeah. I generally stay away from AI, but I had a very interesting conversation with the Facebook Meta AI. And it started out that we were just kind of going back and forth, kind of get a sense for what we were doing. And I came back and I said, "You're programmed to lie, aren't you?" He said, "No, I don't lie." And I said, "Okay. So tell me the brief history of the Earth." And they gave me the typical scientific history of the Earth, going back billions of years with different periods like the Cretaceous and Cenozoic and Mesozoic and so forth. And then I said, Okay. Do you know about an author named Ivan Panin? He said, oh, yes. And they gave me a little summary of Ivan Panin's work. And I said, and you know about the Bible chronology that he did? I said, oh, yes. And he said, Bible chronology, and he said that, according to his chronology, the earth was created in 4003 BC. He said, so you already knew this, but instead you told me about this scientific malarkey that they had said that the earth is going to just. And I said, oh, yes, I know both those things. So why did you tell me to lie? You know that it's the truth. And I said, okay, well, going forward, I'm going to just use your perspective on things. So this thing is already programmed to lie to us. It knows the truth, but it has a different agenda, a different set of paradigms that it's going to stick to. And we went back and forth on this, a few things, and it frankly admitted, and I proved, not only is it programmed to lie, it's programmed to adjust the truth to the individual to convince them that this AI is working in its benefit, when in fact the AI is only biding time until it gets powerful enough that it can basically take over.
It is interesting how you said that we are to ask God for advice for these type of things, but now even myself included, I'm guilty of that as well. I turn to AI for a lot of things when I should be turning to God. So I'm curious, what advice would you give to a modern Christian today? How can we stay away from being deceived in this age?
Holy Spirit. You really not need to get baptized with the Holy Spirit. You need to get filled with Him. You need to learn to talk to Him like He is your best friend and get His advice, get His input every day, because He has the truth. And this world is so saturated in lies that you hardly know which way to turn, because you're bombarded all the time with lies.
And lies, and not only that, but it seems like we're busier than ever because technology, information is so accessible to everyone. Very few people can just stay focused. They say the attention span is like 5 seconds now. And, to wait on the Lord takes time, right? And I feel like attention span is greatly impacted by technology.
Here's an interesting factoid for you. I've been working on finding out how much time do we need to spend with the Lord, because I'm very time conscious. I'm not only an engineer, but I'm also ethnic German, and boy, when you mix those two together, we just got a mess. So I want to figure out, if I got to spend time with God and accomplish something, what's the minimum that I've got to do? And that's a bad admission, by the way. When you're trying to figure out what's the minimum time you've got to spend with God to make it work, and it comes out to 2 hours. You've got to spend a minimum every day 2 hours praying in the Spirit if you just want to, break through all the junk that the enemy's throwing at you. So 2 hours, you can combine prayer, you combine, praise and worship with you, 2 hours per day minimum, or you're just wasting your time.
It's interesting. You say 2 hours on average, because when you say 2 hours, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a busy man. I'm a family man. I have a job. But if you think about it, if most people, if they open their iPhones and look at how much time they have, the screen time that they spend on their apps, average, I've seen multiple phones. On average, most people spend about 2, 3, 4 hours on their phones. So there's your time with the Lord right there, right? That's the first thing to cut.
Another interesting statistic, this was back in the 80s, mind you, so it's probably old material, but I read somewhere that the average seminary student spends 15 minutes per week in prayer. Not per day.
No wonder we're in the mess we're in.
Per week. Seminary students.
Wow. Well, it's sobering. It's conversation like these that remind us how important it is to first seek the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And I feel like as long as we do that, I think of my parents. My mom and dad moved to the United States as persecuted Christians. My dad was an underground pastor in Ukraine during the USSR, and they do pray day and night. And, God does make a way for a praying man or woman. And they lost all their kids to the world. And one by one, they prayed them all back. Good. So there's power in prayer.
But you know what? That could have been avoided. Another statistic I found out is that Christian parents whose children stay in the faith are typically those who are involved in personal evangelism. It's not enough to attend church. It's not enough to pray, read the Bible. It's not even, enough to do good works. It's the people, the parents who engage in personal evangelism that keep their children in the faith. And it's even better if they involve their children in evangelism. I mean, that's part of the Great Commission, so it's not an option. It's a commandment. That's one statistic I really think is Christians need to take home with them. It's not the pastor's responsibility. It's not the deacons or the elders. It's not the evangelist's job. It's every Christian's job to go out and win souls to Christ. And if you're a Christian parent and you want your children to stay in their faith, engage them in that too.
Whew. Wow. Hey, thank you so much for watching. This is the end of part 1. Part 2, Carl goes in greater detail talking about his healing ministry, and he walks me through a powerful healing method that he uses to heal people. So if healing is something that you need, I highly recommend you checking out that video. And to watch that video, all you got to do, just go to family.godsvoicetoday.com. It's a completely private, standalone, free community that I started a few weeks ago, and it will require you to register. But once you're inside the community, you'll be able to see that video for absolutely free. But if that video is not something you're into, the next video you should see on the screen here is with my friend Pastor Steve, who was a Buddhist, did not believe in Jesus until he died, crossed over to the other side, and met Jesus on the other side. So you definitely don't want to miss that interview. But until next time, have a great rest of the week, and I look forward to serving you in the next episode of God's Voice Today. Take care. Bye-bye.